I can hear a baby crying in the shadows. The royal summons goes out 3 days before the winter solstice, carved into iron tablets and delivered to every noble house across the Ironclaw Empire, announcing that the 4-year-old heir to the throne must complete this Scent of the Soul ceremony before the year's coldest night, or the kingdom will fracture into civil war. The decree is absolute. The bloodline must continue. Little Mason, barely tall enough to reach his father's waist, stands blindfolded in the Great Hall of Judgment. His tiny hand outstretched, guided by the icy grip of Alpha King Silas, a man whose life is full of achievements and devoid of warmth, through a line of 17 eligible she-wolves from the most powerful packs across 3 territories. Each woman has been groomed for this moment. Each one trembles with ambition, as a child's innocent touch will either crown them Luna or condemn them to obscurity. But there's a secret hidden in the darkest corner of this marble cathedral. A discarded bloodline that shouldn't be here, clutching a bundle that won't stop whimpering, waiting for this ceremony to end so she can steal enough food to last the week. And when the child's footsteps slow, when his tiny body goes rigid just feet away from a trembling figure behind a pillar, when he speaks words that were never part of the script, the entire empire freezes. 'Cause they know. They all know what's about to crack wide open. Before we witness the moment that shatters a kingdom built on ice, I need you to do something for me. Tell me where you're reading from so I can remind you to breathe, because what's about to unfold will stop your heart. The blindfold is woven from moon-blessed silk, thick enough that Mason can see nothing but the faint glow of ceremonial candles bleeding through the fabric. He's only 4 years old, barely able to pronounce the names of the noble houses he's supposed to unite. Dressed in miniature battle regalia that weighs heavy on his small shoulders, silver clasps, wolf fur trim, a crown too large that keeps slipping down his forehead. His father's hand rests like iron on the back of his neck, steering him, controlling him, ensuring he moves toward the right bloodlines, toward the women who will bring armies and gold and political leverage. It's sacred law, written in blood 3 centuries ago. The scent of the soul requires the heir, no matter how impossibly young, to choose with pure instinct, uncorrupted by sight or reason or the whispers of power-hungry advisors. But little Mason isn't like other heirs. His wolf sense is barely awakened, still a flicker instead of a flame. He stumbles in his oversized boots. He's just a child who should be playing with wooden swords and learning his numbers, not deciding which bloodline survives and which house falls into ruin. And tonight, as the wind howls against the stained-glass windows and the noble she-wolves hold their breath, their perfumes mixing into a suffocating cloud of jasmine and rose and desperation, Mason's small hand begins to tremble. Because somewhere in this hall, beneath the expensive scents and political posturing, there's something else. Something raw. Something that smells like survival and sacrifice and a mother's sleepless nights. And his tiny feet, which were supposed to stop before a princess, are pulling him sideways. Toward the shadows. Toward a woman who isn't supposed to exist. Valeria presses herself against the stone pillar, her borrowed cloak threadbare and stained. Her daughter Madison bundled against her chest in rags that do nothing to stop the cold. She came here because the palace kitchens would have scraps after the ceremony. She came here because her baby is starving, and pride died the day she was cast out of polite society. She never expected the heir to wander off script. She never expected him to stop, to turn his blindfolded face toward her hiding place. And when Mason's small voice cuts through the silence, high and clear and heartbreaking, the words that fall from his lips aren't "I choose you" or "My Luna," or any of the phrases the priests prepared him to say. Instead, he collapses to his knees, his small hands reaching not for a crown but for the edge of Valeria's cloak, and he whispers the 5 words that will rewrite history. "Sir, please don't pick me." The great hall goes silent as death. 17 noblewomen stop breathing. Behind them, Alpha King Silas, legendary for his cruelty, feared across 5 territories, a man who has never shown mercy in 30 years of rule, goes completely, dangerously still. Because the child didn't finish his sentence. And when Mason's voice breaks, when he continues with words no one taught him, words that rip through every political calculation in the room, the entire foundation of the Ironclaw Empire begins to crack. But my baby sister is freezing. Asterisk the Ruthless King stands at a crossroads. Ancient law has been invoked. A guardian claim, older than crowns, deeper than blood, has been triggered by a child's plea for a life that doesn't belong to him. And for the first time in his sterile, immaculate existence, Silas must choose between his pride and something he thought died years ago. His heart, asterisk. What happens when the wrong choice becomes the only choice that can save a kingdom built on ice? The silence in the great hall doesn't break. Shatters. Mason's small hand is still clutching the edge of Valeria's cloak when the first whisper cuts through the frozen air. Then another. Then a wave of scandalized murmurs that builds like a coming storm. The 17 noblewomen stand rigid in their ceremonial gowns, their carefully painted faces cracking with shock and fury. Behind them, the High Council shifts in their velvet seats, hands already moving toward the iron tablets that contain every law, every precedent, every reason why this cannot, will not, should not stand. Valeria can't breathe. Her arms tighten around Madison's bundle, the baby's weak cries muffled against her chest. She tries to step back, to melt further into the shadows, but Mason's grip is surprisingly strong for a 4-year-old. His blindfold is crooked now, slipping down one side of his small face, and she can see one silver eye, exactly like his father's, staring up at her with a desperate hope that breaks something inside her. She wants to run. Every instinct screams at her to flee before the guards seize her, before she's dragged to the dungeons for the crime of existing in a space where discarded omegas have no right to breathe. But her legs won't move. Madison is so cold in her arms, shivering despite being wrapped in every scrap of cloth Valeria could find. The baby hasn't eaten properly in 3 days. Running means certain death in the winter storm outside. Staying might mean execution, but at least it would be quick. Then Alpha King Silas moves. He doesn't speak. Doesn't acknowledge the council members now rising from their seats. Doesn't glance at the noblewomen whose houses have just been publicly humiliated by a child who chose poverty over power. He simply walks forward, each footstep echoing like a judge's gavel against the marble floor. His presence is a physical force. 6 feet 4 inches of controlled violence wrapped in midnight blue ceremonial robes, silver embroidery catching the candlelight like frozen lightning. His face is carved from stone, beautiful in the way glaciers are beautiful, deadly in the way winter itself is deadly. Valeria's survival instincts finally kick in. She drops into a clumsy curtsy, nearly losing her grip on Madison, her voice cracking as she forces out words she doesn't believe will save her. Your Majesty, I apologize, I didn't mean to disrupt. I'll leave immediately, I swear I wasn't trying to. Be silent. His voice cuts through her babbling like a blade through silk. Not loud. Not angry. Just absolute. She clamps her mouth shut, her heart hammering so hard she's certain everyone in the hall can hear it. Mason is still on his knees beside her, his small hand now gripping both her cloak and his father's ceremonial robe, as if he can somehow bridge the impossible distance between them. The blindfold has slipped completely off now, pooling around his neck like a discarded promise. Silas looks down at his son. For a moment, something flickers across that frozen face, something Valeria can't quite name. Then it's gone, replaced by the mask of a king who has never shown weakness, never hesitated, never allowed emotion to corrupt his judgment. Stand up, Mason. The command is gentle by Silas's standards, which means it still sounds like winter itself speaking. Explain what you've done. The little boy scrambles to his feet, his oversized crown finally falling off and clattering against the marble. No one moves to retrieve it. Mason's voice is small but steady, the kind of steady that comes from a child who has already accepted that he might be punished but believes the punishment is worth it. I smelled her, Papa. Under all the flowers and perfume, I smelled something real. Something that hurt. He turns his silver eyes up to Valeria, and there are tears tracking down his round cheeks. And I heard the baby crying. She's so cold, Papa. I could feel it. Like how I get cold at night even with all the blankets. The murmurs explode into outright chaos. A council member with a long white beard stands, his voice booming across the hall. Your Majesty, this is clearly a manipulation. The Omega has somehow. I said be silent. Silas doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. The council member sits back down so fast his chair scrapes against the floor. Silas's gaze moves from his son to Valeria, and she has never felt so exposed in her life. Those silver eyes are scanning her, not with lust or judgment, but with the clinical precision of a predator deciding whether prey is worth the hunt. She knows what he sees. A woman who was beautiful once, perhaps, before hunger carved hollows under her cheekbones and exhaustion painted permanent shadows beneath her eyes. Hair that might have been glossy before it became matted with days of unwashing. Clothes that belong in a trash fire, not a royal ceremony. And the baby. Madison, barely 6 months old, her tiny face red from crying, her small body trembling with cold even wrapped in rags. Silas stares at the child for exactly 3 seconds. Then he does something that will be whispered about in the Iron Claw Empire for the next 100 years. He reaches up and unclasps his royal overcoat. The garment is a masterpiece of craftsmanship. Midnight blue cashmere lined with white wolf fur, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that tell the history of every conquest, every victory, every enemy crushed beneath the Iron Claw banner. It weighs as much as a small child, worth more than most citizens will earn in their entire lives. Kings have gone to war for less valuable prizes. Silas pulls it off his shoulders and without a word, without ceremony, without anything resembling permission, steps forward and wraps it around Valeria and Madison both. She gasps as the weight of it settles over her, as the warmth trapped in the fabric from his body heat engulfs her like a living thing. The overcoat is so large it swallows her completely, dragging on the floor, the collar rising past her ears. Madison's cries stutter, then stop entirely as the baby burrows instinctively into the sudden warmth. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, Valeria feels the cold retreat from her bones. The great hall has gone beyond silent. It has entered a realm of shock so profound that reality itself seems to have paused. Every eye is locked on their king, who now stands in his formal tunic and leather vest, his arms bare to the ceremonial hall's freezing air, looking at Valeria with an expression that gives away absolutely nothing. Your Majesty. An advisor tries again, his voice strangled with horror. You cannot. The ancient law states that. The ancient law, Silas interrupts, still not looking away from Valeria, states that when the heir invokes protection for one who cannot protect themselves, the guardian claim is absolute. No council vote. No debate. No exception. He finally turns his head, just slightly, just enough that his profile is visible to the advisors now clustered behind him like nervous birds. Unless you wish to challenge 300 years of precedent and risk civil war over a coat. No one speaks. No one dares. Silas looks back at Valeria. Can you walk? She nods, not trusting her voice. Her arms are locked around Madison, who has fallen into the kind of sleep that only comes when a body finally stops fighting the cold. Then walk. He turns toward the massive doors at the far end of the hall, the ones that lead to the private royal wing where no common citizen has stepped in living memory. He doesn't check to see if she's following. He simply expects obedience, the way a king always expects obedience. Valeria's legs move before her brain can fully process what's happening. She stumbles forward, the overcoat dragging behind her like a cape, Mason immediately attaching himself to her side as if afraid she'll vanish if he lets go. The crowd parts before them, nobles and council members and guards all stepping back as if the three of them carry some contagious disease. Perhaps they do. Perhaps poverty is the most contagious disease of all in a place like this. They're halfway to the doors when one of the 17 noblewomen, a duchess with copper hair and a gown that cost more than a house, finds her voice. Your Majesty, you cannot seriously mean to honor this farce. The child was obviously confused, manipulated by. Silas stops walking. Valeria nearly crashes into his back. When he turns around, his face is still that perfect mask of ice, but there's something in his eyes now. Something dangerous. Lady Margarethi. His voice is conversational. Pleasant even. Which somehow makes it more terrifying. Do you have children? The Duchess blinks, clearly not expecting the question. Yes, Your Majesty. 2 sons. And if they were freezing to death in front of you, would you consider it a farce to save them? The color drains from Lady Margarethi's face. Of course not, but... Then sit down. He doesn't wait for her response. He simply turns back around and continues walking, and this time Valeria notices something she missed before. His hands are clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white with pressure. The legendary control is still there, but it's costing him something to maintain it. She doesn't understand why that observation makes her heart stutter. The doors to the royal wing swing open before they reach them, guards on either side moving in perfect synchronization, their faces carefully blank. The corridor beyond is warm, actually warm, heated by some system Valeria has never seen in her life. Torches in silver sconces. Carpets thick enough to lose fingers in. Portraits of dead kings staring down with judgment in their painted eyes. Mason is talking now, his small voice echoing in the hallway, filling the silence with a 4-year-old stream of consciousness. Papa, can the baby stay in my room? I have extra blankets. And toys, though she's probably too small for toys. But when she gets bigger we can play. Is she going to be my real sister now? Can I teach her how to? Mason. Silas doesn't slow his pace. Quiet. The boy falls silent immediately, though he doesn't let go of Valeria's hand. They climb a staircase. Marble, of course, everything in this cursed palace is marble. And turn down another corridor, this one lined with doors that all look identical. Silas stops at one near the end and pushes it open. The physician's wing is nothing like Valeria expected. She thought it would be clinical, cold, sterile like the rest of the palace. Instead, it's almost comfortable. A large room with a fireplace already crackling, shelves lined with bottles and herbs and medical texts, 2 beds with clean white sheets, windows overlooking gardens that are currently buried in snow. An elderly woman with silver hair and sharp eyes looks up from a desk in the corner. She takes one look at their group. The shirtless king, the Omega drowning in his overcoat, the small prince, the bundle that won't stop shivering, and doesn't even blink. Guardian claim? She asks, already moving toward a cabinet. Yes. Silas's voice is clipped. Professional. Back to the mask. The infant is hypothermic. The mother is malnourished. Mason is unharmed but will need observation for shock. I'm not in shock, Papa, Mason protests. I feel fine. Observation, Silas repeats, and the word is final. The physician, she must be important to speak so casually to the king, gestures toward one of the beds. Lay the baby down. Carefully. We need to warm her slowly or we risk cardiac arrest. Valeria's arms refuse to move. Madison is finally warm, finally asleep, and every instinct screams that letting go means losing her forever. She's lost too much already. She can't. She will not die here. Silas's voice cuts through her panic, and when she looks up, he's staring at her with those impossible silver eyes. I do not break my word. If I claim you under guardian law, you are mine to protect. That includes the child. Do you understand? Valeria doesn't understand anything happening right now. But she nods anyway because what choice does she have? Slowly, carefully, she unwraps Madison from the cocoon of the royal overcoat and lays her on the bed. The baby whimpers at the loss of warmth, her tiny fists curling, but the physician is already there with heated blankets and gentle hands that speak of decades of practice. Silas hasn't moved. He's standing in the doorway like a sentinel, his arms crossed over his chest, still shirtless, seemingly unbothered by the fact that he just gave away his most valuable garment to a woman whose name he doesn't even know. The physician glances at him while checking Madison's pulse. You can leave, Your Majesty. This will take several hours, and you have a hall full of angry nobles waiting for. I will stay. His tone brooks no argument. Until I know the child is stable. The physician's eyebrows rise slightly, but she doesn't comment. She just returns to her work, murmuring instructions to Valeria about keeping Madison still, about watching for signs of frostbite, about 100 medical terms that blur together in Valeria's exhausted mind. Mason has climbed onto the second bed and is watching everything with wide, curious eyes. His blindfold is still hanging around his neck like a scarf. His crown is somewhere back in the Great Hall, forgotten. And Alpha King Silas, the man who has never shown mercy in 30 years of rule, whose life is full of achievements and devoid of warmth, stands guard at the door, watching a commoner's baby fight for life in his private physician's wing. Still wearing his son's choice like armor, even though everyone in the kingdom will call it the wrong choice. Even though he might believe it himself. Valeria clutches the cashmere overcoat tighter around her shoulders and tries not to think about what happens when morning comes, when the shock wears off, when the ruthless king remembers that mercy is a weakness he cannot afford. But for now, in this moment, her daughter is warm. And somehow, impossibly, that's enough. If you're still here, you're already part of this pack. Subscribing is how this story survives. The physician declares Madison stable 3 hours before dawn. Valeria hasn't slept. She's been sitting on the edge of the medical bed, one hand resting on her daughter's chest to feel the steady rise and fall of breathing, the other clutching the cashmere overcoat that still smells like winter and authority and something darker she can't quite name. Mason fell asleep an hour ago on the second bed, curled into a ball with his thumb in his mouth, a habit the tutors have been trying to break for months, but tonight no one has the heart to stop him. Silas hasn't left the doorway. He moved once, 2 hours in, when the physician needed to retrieve something from a cabinet behind him. He stepped aside, then returned to his post like a guard on duty. He still hasn't put on a shirt. No one has dared to bring him one. The elderly physician, her name is Dr. Miriam, Valeria learned, though she didn't dare ask directly, washes her hands in a basin and dries them on a clean cloth. Her voice is softer now, tinged with relief. The child will live. She was closer than I'd like, but she's young enough that her body fought back hard. She'll need careful monitoring for the next few days, frequent feedings, warmth. She glances at Valeria, and there's something almost kind in her sharp eyes. You did well keeping her alive this long. Many wouldn't have managed it. Valeria's throat closes up. She nods because speaking will break her, and she cannot afford to break. Not here. Not in front of the king who is still watching everything with those unreadable silver eyes. Dr. Miriam turns to Silas. Your Majesty, I'll need to keep them here for at least 48 hours for observation. After that, if you still wish to honor the guardian claim. I do. His voice cuts through the room like a blade. No hesitation. No doubt. Prepare the nursery wing. The physician's eyebrows rise. The nursery wing hasn't been used since Mason was an infant. It will take days to make it suitable for. Then you have until sunrise. Silas finally moves from the doorway, crossing the room in 3 long strides to stand beside Mason's bed. He looks down at his sleeping son, and for just a moment, so brief Valeria almost misses it, his expression softens into something that might be tenderness. Then it's gone, buried under ice again. When they wake, they'll need food. Real food, not medical gruel. Have the kitchens prepare something appropriate for a malnourished Omega and an infant who's been weaned too early. Dr. Miriam nods, unbothered by the barrage of commands. She's probably used to it. And you, Your Majesty. You've been standing for 3 hours. Perhaps. I'm fine. He turns away from Mason and walks to the door, pausing just at the threshold. He doesn't look back at Valeria, but she feels the weight of his attention anyway. Sleep. You're no use to the children if you collapse. Then he's gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounds like a cell door locking. Or maybe like a promise being sealed. Valeria can't tell the difference anymore. She doesn't sleep. She watches Madison breathe and tries to understand how her life went from stealing kitchen scraps to sitting in the royal physician's wing wrapped in a king's coat in the span of 4 hours. Doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. Guardian claim or not, kings don't protect discarded omegas. They certainly don't empty their nursery wings for bastard children who have no right to exist in palace walls. But when morning comes, gray and cold through the frosted windows, servants arrive with breakfast trays laden with soft breads and warm milk and eggs cooked in butter that smells like heaven. They don't speak to her. They don't even look at her directly. They simply set the food down, curtsy to the heir beside her head, and leave. Mason wakes up ravenous and confused, his silver eyes blinking in the pale light. Mama Val. He's called her that since the first night she found him crying in the garden 6 months ago, before she knew he was the heir, before everything became complicated. Did last night really happen? Did Papa really let us stay? I think so. Valeria's voice is rough from disuse. Eat. Before it gets cold. He doesn't need to be told twice. He attacks the breakfast with the efficiency of a small, determined wolf, talking between bites about all the things he wants to show Madison when she's big enough to walk, about the gardens and the library and the secret passages only he knows about. Valeria lets his voice wash over her and feeds Madison carefully, watching the baby's eyes blink open, brown like her own, not silver like the king's, and feeling something in her chest crack open with relief. Dr. Miriam returns mid-morning with an assistant carrying fresh clothes. Not servants' clothes, Valeria notices with growing unease. The dress is simple, yes, but it's made of soft gray wool that looks new, with embroidery at the collar that marks it as belonging to someone of rank. The kind of rank Valeria hasn't held since she was 17 and still believed the world might be kind. His Majesty had these sent from storage, Dr. Miriam says, setting the clothes on the empty bed. They should fit well enough until proper measurements can be taken. Proper measurements for what? The words slip out before Valeria can stop them. The physician gives her a look that suggests she thinks Valeria might be simple. For your wardrobe. You're under guardian claim now. That means you're under the king's protection, which means you cannot walk around the palace looking like. She stops herself, clears her throat. You'll need appropriate clothing. Valeria stares at the dress and feels the world tilting sideways again. I don't understand what's happening. Neither does anyone else, Dr. Miriam says dryly. But I've served this family for 30 years, and I learned long ago not to question Alpha King Silas when he's made a decision. He doesn't make them lightly, and he doesn't change his mind. She moves toward the door, then pauses. Though I'll admit, this is the first time I've seen him give away his ceremonial coat. That garment has been in the royal family for 6 generations. His grandfather wore it during the treaty wars. She leaves before Valeria can respond, which is good because Valeria has no idea what to say to that. She looks down at the cashmere pooled around her shoulders and tries not to think about the weight of history she's been wrapped in, the centuries of conquest and blood and power that she has no right to touch. The 48 hours pass in a blur of medical checks and careful feedings, and Mason's constant chatter filling the silence. Madison grows stronger each day, her cries becoming louder and more indignant, her tiny fists waving with increasing coordination. Valeria watches her daughter transform from a barely breathing bundle to an actual baby again, and feels something she hasn't felt in months. Hope. Silas doesn't return to the physician's wing. But evidence of him appears like clockwork. On the second morning, a wooden box arrives with Mason's name carved into the lid. Inside are glass tubes and copper wire and tiny gears, the components for some kind of science experiment that has Mason squealing with delight and immediately dumping everything onto the floor to begin construction. An hour later, a second package arrives. Molar. Wrapped in plain paper. Inside are 3 soft cloth toys that make no sound when squeezed, designed for infants too young to be startled by noise. The stitching is so fine it must have cost a fortune. There's no note, no explanation. But Mason looks at the toys and announces with absolute certainty, "Papa sent these for Madison." Dr. Miriam, checking Madison's temperature nearby, makes a non-committal sound. His Majesty has been asking for updates every 4 hours. Medical updates, of course. He's very particular about the health of those under his protection. Valeria holds one of the silent toys, a small wolf cub with embroidered eyes, and tries to reconcile the image of the Ruthless Alpha King personally selecting gifts for a bastard infant. It doesn't fit. Nothing about this fits. On the third morning, Dr. Miriam declares them fit to leave the medical wing. "The nursery is ready," she says, gathering up her charts and medical instruments. "His Majesty has requested that you be moved this afternoon. Servants will come to escort you." "Can I see Papa first?" Mason asks, already bouncing on his toes with excitement. "I want to show him what I built. It's a water filtration system using condensation and—" "His Majesty is in council meetings all day," Dr. Miriam interrupts gently. "Important business regarding the events of the ceremony. But I'm sure he'll want to see your project when time allows." Mason's face falls, but he nods with a kind of resignation that suggests he's used to his father being unavailable. It makes something ache in Valeria's chest, though she has no right to feel anything about how this family operates. The servants arrive exactly at noon. 6 of them, led by an older woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and the posture of someone who has spent decades managing chaos. She introduces herself as head housekeeper Thomasine, her voice brisk and professional, her eyes scanning Valeria with the kind of assessment that suggests she's calculating worth and finding the numbers disappointing. "If you'll follow me," Thomasine says, not waiting for a response before turning on her heel and striding into the corridor. Valeria gathers Madison, now dressed in a soft white gown that definitely came from palace storage, and follows with Mason chattering at her elbow about all the places they're going to explore. The palace is different in daylight, less intimidating but more vast, an endless maze of corridors and staircases and rooms whose purposes she can't begin to guess. They pass servants who stop and stare, nobles who whisper behind their hands, guards who keep their eyes straight ahead but whose tension is visible in their rigid shoulders. The nursery wing is in the eastern corner of the palace, far from the throne room and council chambers, tucked into a space that gets morning sunlight and overlooks gardens that are currently buried under 2 feet of snow. Thomasine pushes open a heavy oak door and gestures for Valeria to enter. The room beyond steals her breath. It's enormous. Not in an intimidating way, but in a way that suggests it was designed for life, for noise, for children who need space to grow. The walls are painted a soft cream color, warm and inviting. There's a fireplace large enough to roast a pig, currently crackling with a fire that turns the air almost tropical. Thick carpets cover the floor in patterns of forest green and deep gold. 2 beds, one small and child-sized, one larger with a cradle beside it, are positioned near the windows. Shelves line one wall, already stocked with books and toys and supplies that must have been pulled from storage and cleaned in the last 3 days. Mason makes a sound like a squeaky toy and immediately runs to the shelves, his hands reaching for books about stars and machines and things Valeria can't pronounce. Thomasine clasps her hands in front of her and launches into what sounds like a memorized speech. "You'll take your meals here for the first week while the staff adjusts to the new arrangements. A wet nurse is on call if needed for the infant, though His Majesty has specified that you're to maintain primary care. Laundry will be collected daily. Medical checks will continue every morning until Dr. Miriam clears you. Mason's tutors have been informed of the new living arrangements and will adjust their schedules accordingly. You are not to leave this wing without escort until—" "Wait." Valeria's voice cracks on the word. "I can't. This is too much. I'm just here until Madison is strong enough to travel, and then You're under guardian claim." Thomasine's voice is flat, brooking no argument. "That means you reside in the palace until His Majesty decides otherwise. The king doesn't make temporary arrangements. But I'm nobody. I'm just an Omega who was in the wrong place at the— You are the one the heir chose." Thomasine's eyes finally meet hers, and there's something almost pitying in that gaze. "Which makes you either the luckiest woman in the empire or the most cursed. Time will tell which." She moves toward the door, her duty apparently complete. "Dinner will be sent up at 6. Do not wander the palace unescorted. There are those who are displeased with recent events. She leaves. The door closes, and Valeria is left standing in a room that's bigger than the entire shack she's been living in for the past year, holding a baby who's dressed in palace clothes, watching a 4-year-old prince organize books by subject with a kind of focus that suggests he's been doing this his whole life. This isn't real. Can't be real. Kings don't do this. They don't empty nurseries for street omegas. They don't send science projects and silent toys. They don't. There's a knock at the door. Hesitant, Valeria crosses the room and opens it, expecting another servant with instructions or rules or judgments. Instead, she finds Silas. He's dressed formally now. Black tunic with silver buttons, leather vest. His hair pulled back in a style that emphasizes the sharp angles of his face. He looks like what he is, a king. Powerful. Dangerous. Absolutely untouchable. But there's something in his hands that breaks the image. A small wooden box, similar to the one Mason received but unmarked. He doesn't enter the room. Doesn't smile. His voice is as cold as ever. Mason's experiment. Did he complete it? Yes, he did. It works. The water filtration thing. He was very proud. Valeria's heart is hammering. She doesn't know why. Maybe because this is the first time they've been face to face since that night in the Great Hall, and she still doesn't understand what's happening, what he wants, what debt she's supposed to pay for this impossible protection. Silas nods once. Good. Tell him I'll review it tomorrow. His eyes shift past her, scanning the nursery with the same clinical precision he used in the medical wing. The room is adequate. It's more than adequate. It's, Your Majesty, I don't understand why you're doing this. The Guardian claim I understand its law. But this room, the clothes, the toys, you don't have to. I never do things I don't have to do. He holds out the wooden box. For the infant. Since she seems to prefer quiet objects. Valeria takes the box with trembling hands and opens it. Inside is a mobile meant to hang above a cradle. Delicate carved birds on nearly invisible strings, painted in soft colors that won't startle. Each bird is a masterpiece of miniature craftsmanship, the kind of thing that takes days to create. The kind of thing that costs more than she's earned in her entire life. She looks up at him and for a moment, just a moment, she thinks she sees something crack in that frozen mask. Something that looks almost like loneliness. But then it's gone and he's turning away. His voice carrying back to her as he walks down the corridor. The physician was right. You did well keeping her alive. Most wouldn't have managed it. Then he's gone, his footsteps fading into the vast silence of the palace, leaving Valeria standing in a doorway holding a king's gift and trying to understand how the Ruthless Alpha King learned that Madison prefers quiet toys. How he knew the exact shade of blue that wouldn't frighten an infant's new eyes. Behind her, Mason calls out about another book he's found. His voice bright with joy that echoes in the too large room. Valeria looks down at the mobile in her hands, at the tiny birds frozen mid-flight, beautiful and silent, and realizes with growing certainty that Alpha King Silas is a man who pays attention to details. Which means he's been watching them far more closely than anyone realized. And she has no idea if that should terrify her or give her hope. The attack comes on the 7th day, when Valeria is finally beginning to believe that maybe, impossibly, this fragile new life might last. She's sitting by the window with Madison in her arms, watching Mason attempt to teach a lesson about planetary rotation to his stuffed wolf, when the door opens without a knock. Not Silas, she's learned to recognize his footsteps by now, heavy and measured and somehow louder than they should be. Not Thomasine either, whose arrival is always preceded by the sharp click of her practical boots. This person moves like water, silent and deliberate, and when Valeria turns her head, her blood goes cold. The man in the doorway is beautiful in the way poisonous things are beautiful. Tall, though not quite as tall as Silas. Silver eyes identical to the king's, but where Silas's gaze is ice, this man's is frozen mercury. Constantly shifting, calculating, searching for weakness. His hair is darker, almost black, pulled back in a style that's just formal enough to be respectable but loose enough to seem careless. He's wearing deep burgundy, expensive but not royal, the kind of calculated choice that says he knows exactly how close to the throne he can dress without overstepping. Mason looks up from his stuffed wolf, and his face transforms with uncomplicated joy. "Uncle Ryan." The man, Ryan, smiles, and it's warm and genuine and absolutely terrifying because Valeria can see the razor blade hiding beneath it. "Hello, little prince. Still teaching astronomy to toys, I see." "They need to learn," Mason says seriously. "Most people don't understand how orbital mechanics work, and that's a tragedy." Ryan laughs, the sound rich and charming. He crosses the room with the easy confidence of someone who belongs here, who has every right to be here, and crouches down to Mason's level. "Your father tells me you've been building experiments. Will you show me?" Mason is already scrambling toward his shelf of projects, chattering about water filtration and condensation cycles, completely oblivious to the way Ryan's eyes have shifted to Valeria with the focus of a predator who's just spotted prey. He stands slowly, his smile never wavering, and moves closer to where she sits frozen in the window seat. His voice drops just low enough that Mason won't hear over his own enthusiastic explanation. "So you're the miracle worker. The Omega who managed to trap a king with a crying baby and a convenient ceremony." Valeria's arms tighten around Madison. "I didn't trap anyone. I didn't even want to be there." "Of course you didn't." Ryan's tone is agreeable, pleasant, the verbal equivalent of a knife sliding between ribs. "You just happened to be hiding in the Great Hall during the most important ceremony in a decade, with a conveniently sick child. At the exact moment my nephew was blindfolded and vulnerable to manipulation. I was looking for food." The words come out sharper than she intends. "My daughter was starving. I didn't know what the ceremony was. I didn't know the heir would. Spare me." His smile finally drops, and what's underneath is colder than anything Silas has ever shown her. "I've spent the last week making inquiries. Very discreet inquiries. Do you know what I found?" He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. "Marriage certificate. 17 years old. Valeria Ashford, newly presented Omega, wed to Lord Marcus Thornwell of the Eastern Territories." The world tilts. Valeria hasn't heard that name in 5 years. Hasn't let herself think about Marcus, about the way everything fell apart, about the reason she ended up on the streets with nothing but her daughter and the clothes on her back. Ryan continues, his voice smooth as silk. "The marriage lasted exactly 8 months before Lord Thornwell petitioned for annulment on grounds of, and I quote, moral corruption and irredeemable dishonor. The council granted it immediately. You were stripped of your title, your dowry, and your family name. There was even a formal declaration stating you were unfit for noble society." He taps the parchment against his palm. Fascinating reading, really. Especially the part about the illegitimate child born 6 months after the annulment. The one you tried to pass off as his heir. Madison. He's talking about Madison. Valeria feels her vision narrow, her wolf instincts roaring to life for the first time in years, every maternal defense screaming at her to run, to fight, to protect her child from whatever this man is planning. "Madison is mine," she says quietly. "No one else's. And whatever lies Marcus told the council. Oh, I don't particularly care if they were lies." Ryan leans against the wall, casual and relaxed, like they're discussing the weather. "What matters is that they're documented. Official. Which means you are officially a disgraced Omega who was cast out for dishonoring a noble bloodline." His eyes gleam. "Now, imagine what happens when I present this information to the High Council. Imagine their reaction when they learn that the woman my brother has taken under guardian claim, the woman now living in the royal nursery, caring for the heir, is the same woman who was declared morally corrupt and unfit for society." Valeria's heart is hammering so hard she can barely breathe. "Why are you telling me this? Why not just go to the council now?" "Because I'm not unreasonable." Ryan's smile returns, sharp and predatory. "I'm giving you a choice. You can leave. Tonight. Quietly. take your bastard daughter and disappear back into whatever hole you crawled out of. I'll even provide transportation and enough coin to keep you fed for a few months. All I ask is that you go without drama, without tearful goodbyes, without forcing my brother to make this more complicated than it needs to be. And if I refuse, then I take this to the council tomorrow morning." He pushes off the wall, moving closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "And they will tear you apart. They'll declare the guardian claim invalid on grounds of fraud. They'll say you manipulated the ceremony, corrupted the heir, deceived the king. Silas might be powerful, but even he can't override the entire High Council when they have documented proof of moral corruption. You'll be tried, convicted, and exiled within a week. Maybe executed if they decide to make an example." He pauses, lets that sink in. "And Madison, well, illegitimate children of disgraced omegas don't fare well in this empire. She'll end up in an orphanage at best, dead in a gutter at worst." Valeria looks down at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms, finally healthy and warm and safe after so many months of struggle. She thinks about Mason, still chattering about his experiments across the room, oblivious to the threat unfolding. She thinks about Silas, who gave them his coat and filled this nursery with silent toys and science projects, who watches them with those unreadable silver eyes like he's trying to solve an equation he doesn't understand. "Why do you want me gone?" Her voice is steady, even though everything inside her is screaming. "What difference does it make to you if we stay?" Ryan's expression shifts into something that might be genuine for the first time. "My brother is the strongest alpha in 3 generations. He's ruthless, brilliant, exactly what this empire needs. But he's also alone, isolated. He's built walls so high that no one can reach him, and it's made him effective but fragile. One crack in that armor and everything falls apart." He looks toward where Mason is still playing, and there's something almost protective in his gaze. "You and your sob story, your struggling mother routine, your crying baby. You're a crack. Weakness. And I will not watch him destroy everything he's built because he suddenly decided to play savior to a street omega, who seduced a 4-year-old into choosing her. I didn't seduce anyone. Mason chose to help my daughter because he's a good child. Mason is 4. Ryan's voice cuts like a whip. He doesn't understand politics or manipulation or the fact that adults lie. He smelled desperation and thought he could fix it. That's not fate. That's not the goddess speaking. That's a child being exploited. Valeria stands up, still holding Madison, her voice shaking with rage she's been suppressing for 7 days. "You think I want this? You think I wanted to be dragged into a palace where everyone looks at me like I'm dirt? You think I enjoy watching your brother struggle to figure out how to be near his own son because he's so terrified of showing weakness? I would leave right now if I thought it wouldn't destroy Mason, if I thought Madison would survive another winter on the streets. Then we have an agreement." Ryan pulls a small leather purse from his jacket and sets it on the table. It lands with a heavy clink. "Enough coin for 6 months. Maybe more if you're careful. There's a carriage waiting in the east courtyard at midnight. Be in it or face the council in the morning." He turns toward the door, pausing only to ruffle Mason's hair and murmur something about visiting again soon. Then he's gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounds like a trap snapping shut. Valeria stands frozen in the middle of the nursery, holding her daughter and staring at the purse of coins on the table. Mason has finally stopped talking, his small face scrunched up in confusion. "Mama Val, are you okay? You look sad." She forces a smile that feels like it might crack her face. "I'm fine, little prince. Just tired." But she's not fine. Because she has exactly 12 hours to decide whether to abandon Mason, the child who saved her daughter's life, who calls her Mama Val and teaches astronomy to stuffed wolves, or stay and risk everything when Ryan takes his evidence to the council. Stay and watch Madison be ripped away and thrown into an orphanage or worse. Stay and force Silas to choose between his throne and a woman he barely knows. The choice should be obvious. She should take the coin and run. Save Madison. disappear into the night before anyone else gets hurt by her cursed existence. But when she looks down at her daughter's sleeping face, then over at Mason carefully arranging his experiment pieces by size, she realizes something that makes her blood run cold. She can't leave. Not because she's brave or noble or believes in fairy tales about ruthless kings with hidden hearts. She can't leave because if she does, Mason will think it's his fault. He'll think he made the wrong choice. He'll think he failed to save them. And she cannot do that to a 4-year-old child who has already learned to expect disappointment from every adult in his life. Valeria looks at the purse of coins on the table and makes a decision that will either save them all or destroy everything. She's not running. Let Ryan take his evidence to the council. Let them try to tear her apart. Because for the first time in 5 years, she has something worth fighting for that isn't just survival. She has children who need her to stay. The winter solstice ball is a spectacle of ice and power. The great hall transformed into something that looks like the heart of a glacier. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors polished to mirror shine. Every noble house in the empire has sent representatives, all dressed in their finest. Silks and velvets in deep winter colors, jewelry that catches the light like captured stars. The air smells of expensive wine and colder ambitions. Valeria doesn't want to be here. She tried every argument she could think of when Thomasine arrived that afternoon with a gown the color of midnight and instructions from the king himself. But the head housekeeper was immovable, her voice brooking no disagreement. His Majesty has requested your presence. When the king requests, you comply. So now Valeria stands at the edge of the ballroom in a dress that fits too well, that must have cost more than she's earned in her entire life, watching the nobility circle each other like elegant sharks. Madison is safely in the nursery with Dr. Miriam on watch. Mason is beside his father on the raised dais at the far end of the hall, small and serious in his formal robes. His hand gripping Silas's with the kind of trust that makes Valeria's chest ache. She hasn't told anyone about Ryan's ultimatum. Hasn't mentioned the leather purse still sitting on the nursery table, the coins inside counting down the hours until he makes his move. The midnight deadline passed 3 days ago, which means Ryan is done waiting. The realization hits her the same moment she spots him across the hall, moving through the crowd with predatory grace, a rolled parchment in his hand. He catches her eye and smiles, the kind of smile that says checkmate. Her heart stops. He's going to do it now. In front of everyone. In front of the entire empire. Ryan climbs the steps to the dais, bows formally to his brother, and the casual conversations throughout the hall begin to die like candles being snuffed. Everyone can sense it. That shift in the air that precedes an execution or a coup or the kind of political theater that will be whispered about for decades. Silas looks down at his brother with those unreadable silver eyes. Ryan, I didn't expect you to interrupt the festivities. Forgive me, Your Majesty. Ryan's voice carries across the now silent hall, pitched perfectly for maximum drama. But there's a matter of urgent importance that cannot wait. A matter concerning the guardian claim you invoked 12 days ago. The temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. Valeria feels every eye in the hall turn toward her. Hundreds of gazes landing like physical blows. She wants to run. Every instinct screams at her to flee before this gets worse, before Ryan destroys her in front of these people who already hate her. But she forces herself to stay still, to keep her chin up, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Silas's voice is dangerously quiet. What matter? Ryan unrolls the parchment with theatrical precision. I have here documented evidence that the Omega you've taken under protection, the woman currently residing in the royal nursery caring for your heir, is the same Valeria Ashford who was formally declared unfit for noble society 5 years ago. Annulled by her husband on grounds of moral corruption. Stripped of her title and cast out by unanimous council vote. He pauses, lets the words sink in. She deceived you, brother. She used a sick child and a sacred ceremony to infiltrate the palace, to gain access to the heir, to... Enough! Silas's voice doesn't rise, but it cuts through Ryan's speech like a blade through silk. You will not speak of her in those terms. Ryan blinks, clearly not expecting to be interrupted. Your Majesty, the evidence is. I don't care about your evidence. Silas stands slowly, his hand still gripping Mason's, and the power in that simple movement makes the entire hall hold its breath. I know who Valeria Ashford is. I knew 3 days after the ceremony, when I had my own investigators look into her past. The words hit Valeria like a physical blow. He knew. He's known this entire time. About Marcus, about the annulment, about everything that Ryan just threatened to expose. And he said nothing, did nothing, just kept sending science projects and silent toys like none of it mattered. Ryan's confident smile falters slightly. Then you know she's unfit to. I know that she kept a child alive through winter with no resources, no support, and no hope. Silas's gaze sweeps across the hall, touching every noble face, every council member, every person who came here tonight expecting entertainment and is about to get a lesson instead. I know that she could have abandoned that child to save herself, could have left her in the snow and walked away to find an easier life. But she didn't. His voice hardens into something that sounds like judgment, which is more than I can say for half the nobles in this room who've discarded their own blood when it became inconvenient. A ripple of shock moves through the crowd. Someone gasps. Ryan's face has gone pale, his careful plans clearly unraveling. Your Majesty, an elderly council member stands from his seat near the dais, his voice shaking with outrage. Surely you cannot mean to defend a disgraced Omega over the documented ruling of. I can and I will. Silas finally releases Mason's hand and steps forward to the edge of the dais, and suddenly he's not just a king anymore. He's something older, something that predates crowns and councils and political maneuvering. He's an alpha in his prime, powerful and absolute, and the dominance rolling off him makes every person in the hall lower their eyes instinctively. The Guardian claim was invoked by my heir. Not by politics, not by manipulation. By a 4-year-old child who heard a baby crying and decided that saving a life was more important than saving face. He looks down at Mason, and for the first time since Valeria has known him, Silas's expression cracks open into something that might be pride. My son made a choice. The right choice. And I will not dishonor him by claiming it was invalid because the woman he chose to protect wasn't born into the right bloodline. But the law states. Another council member tries. The law states that Guardian claims are absolute. Silas interrupts, his voice rising now, filling the hall like winter thunder. No council vote. No debate. No exception. You taught me that law when I was Mason's age. You drilled it into me for years. And now that it's inconvenient, now that it doesn't serve your political games, you want to pretend it doesn't exist. His laugh is cold and bitter. How quickly principles disappear when they threaten your comfort. Ryan is still standing on the dais, the parchment hanging forgotten in his hand. His face a mask of barely controlled fury. Brother, you're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. This woman is. This woman, Silas says, and his gaze finally lands on Valeria across the crowded hall, pinning her in place with an intensity that steals her breath. Kept her child alive when the entire world told her to let go. She survived disgrace and poverty and the kind of cruelty that would have broken most of the people in this room. And when my son reached out to her in his moment of pure instinct, she didn't see an opportunity. She saw a child trying to help. His voice drops, becomes something quieter but no less powerful. That is not manipulation. That is not corruption. That is strength. The silence in the hall is absolute now. No one moves. No one breathes. Valeria feels tears burning behind her eyes and forces them back because she cannot cry here, cannot show weakness in front of these people who want nothing more than to see her destroyed. Silas turns back to the assembled nobles, and when he speaks again, his voice carries the weight of law. I, Alpha King Silas of the Iron Claw Empire, do hereby officially claim Valeria Ashford and her daughter Madison under my protection, not as charity, not as obligation, but as my right and my choice. He pauses, lets the words echo. Any who challenge this claim challenge me directly. Any who threaten them threaten the crown. And I promise you, I have never been merciful to threats against my crown. A council member with a long gray beard stands slowly, his face tight with barely suppressed rage. Your Majesty, this is unprecedented. The council has the right to. The council has the right to advise, Silas interrupts. Not to command. If you disagree with my decision, you are welcome to submit your resignation effective immediately. I will find advisors who understand that a king who cannot protect a freezing pup is no king at all. The words hang in the air like a challenge, like a dare. The council member sits back down, his jaw clenched so tight Valeria can see the muscle jumping in his cheek. Ryan is still standing on the dais, and for a moment Valeria thinks he might actually attack his brother, might let his fury override his political calculations. But then Silas turns to look at him, and whatever he sees in those identical silver eyes makes Ryan step back. Was there anything else you wanted to present? Silas asks, his voice casual now, almost bored. More evidence of her unworthiness. More reasons why I should abandon the guardian claim and throw a mother and infant into the winter cold. Ryan's hands clench around the parchment, crumpling it. No, Your Majesty. Nothing else. Good. Silas gestures dismissively. Then get off my dais. You're blocking the view. Ryan descends the steps slowly, his face carefully blank now, but Valeria can see the fury burning beneath the surface. He passes close enough to her that she can hear his whispered words, so quiet only she can catch them. This isn't over. Then he's gone, disappearing into the crowd of shocked nobles, and Valeria is left standing alone while the entire empire watches. Silas raises his hand, and the musicians in the corner, who have been frozen in place for the entire confrontation, immediately begin playing again. The sound is jarring, too cheerful for the tension still crackling through the air. But it's a command, clear as spoken words. Resume the celebration. Pretend this didn't happen. Move on. The nobles begin to move again, conversations restarting in hushed whispers, but no one approaches Valeria. She's become something untouchable now, marked by the king's protection and his wrath in equal measure. She doesn't see Silas approach. One moment she's standing alone near the edge of the hall, the next he's there in front of her, close enough that she can see the exhaustion hidden in the lines around his eyes. You knew, she says quietly, the words barely audible over the music. About my past. About the annulment. You knew and you said nothing. I needed to know if Ryan would move against you. He's been circling this situation since the ceremony, looking for weakness. Silas's voice is flat, matter-of-fact, but there's something in his gaze that makes her chest tighten. I apologize for using you as bait. You could have warned me. If I had warned you, you would have run. And then Ryan would have won. He tilts his head slightly, studying her with those impossibly silver eyes. You're stronger than you believe, Valeria Ashford. Strong enough to keep a child alive through winter. Strong enough to stand in this hall while the Empire judges you. Strong enough to be exactly what my son needed that night in the Great Hall. Valeria's throat closes up. She wants to tell him that she's not strong, that she's terrified every single day, that she still doesn't understand why he's doing this. But before she can find the words, he's already turning away, returning to the dais where Mason is waiting with wide, worried eyes. The ball continues around her. Music and dancing and political whispers that will shape the next decade of empire politics. But Valeria stands still in her midnight blue gown and finally lets herself believe it. She's not leaving. Not tonight. Not ever. Because the Ruthless Alpha King just claimed her before the entire empire. And when Silas makes a decision, he doesn't change his mind. The palace wakes to the sound of laughter, which is something that never happened before. Before Valeria. Before Madison. Before Silas learned that the spaces between achievements could be filled with something other than silence. He hears it now as he walks through the east corridor toward the nursery, though it's not really a nursery anymore, not with Mason turning 6 next month and already reading texts meant for children twice his age. The boy's voice carries through the heavy oak door, high and excited, explaining something about gravity to his little sister with a kind of enthusiasm that makes even complex physics sound like a game. Silas pauses outside the door, his hand on the handle, and does something he's been doing more often lately. He listens. Just for a moment. Just long enough to hear Madison's squealing laugh. She's 2.5 now, her vocabulary expanding daily in ways that both delight and terrify him, followed by the sound of something crashing and Valeria's resigned sigh. Mason, I told you not to build the ramp that steep. Now we have blocks everywhere, and your sister thinks destruction is hilarious. But Mama, the angle was necessary to demonstrate velocity. And Madison's laugh is scientifically important data about Mason. Look. Now. He pushes open the door and finds exactly what he expected. The room that was once pristine and organized now looks like a tornado hit it. Blocks scattered across every surface. Books stacked in precarious towers. Mason's latest experiment, something involving a wooden ramp and what appears to be a very elaborate pulley system, taking up half the floor space. And in the middle of the chaos, Valeria sits cross-legged on the carpet with Madison in her lap, both of them covered in what looks suspiciously like breakfast porridge. She looks up when he enters, and something in his chest tightens the way it always does now when she smiles at him. It's not the careful, frightened smile she wore those first months. It's real, warm. The kind of smile that suggests she's forgotten to be afraid of him, which is either the best thing that's ever happened or the most dangerous. He hasn't decided which yet. Your Majesty, she says, and there's gentle teasing in her voice now, the kind that would have gotten someone executed 2 years ago. Did you come to observe the scientific method in action? Or are you here to tell Mason that ramps in the breakfast room are a structural hazard? Papa! Madison squirms out of Valeria's lap and toddles toward him with a kind of fearless confidence that still stops his heart. She's wearing a little dress the color of spring leaves, her brown curls wild around her face, porridge smeared across one cheek. She reaches up with both arms in the universal gesture of demanding to be held, and Silas, who once executed a man for touching his formal robes without permission, crouches down and lifts her without hesitation. She immediately grabs his face with sticky hands. Papa, I helped. I pushed the blocks. I can see that. He tries to keep his voice stern, the way a king should sound, but Madison just giggles and buries her face in his neck, leaving what is definitely porridge on his collar. Behind him, he hears Mason scrambling to clean up the blocks, muttering calculations under his breath. Valeria stands slowly, brushing porridge from her dress. A simple thing in soft gray that she chose herself, not the formal gowns Thomasine keeps trying to force on her. I'm sorry. I told them you had morning council meetings and they should be quiet, but Mason discovered a new theory about momentum and it's fine. And the strange thing is, he means it. 2 years ago, this chaos would have sent him into a cold rage. Now he finds himself scheduling morning councils later just so he can hear the laughter first. The meetings can wait. He moves to the window seat. His window seat, though he's not sure when it became his, and sits with Madison still clinging to him like a small, porridge-covered barnacle. Mason abandons the blocks and immediately climbs up beside him, launching into an explanation of his velocity experiment that involves more hand gestures than actual science. Silas listens, asks the occasional question that makes Mason's face light up with joy, and watches Valeria gather the scattered blocks with practiced efficiency. This is not what he imagined his life would look like. When he took the throne at 22, he had a clear vision: power, control, absolute authority unmarred by weakness or sentiment. He would rule perfectly because perfection was the only thing that mattered. He would produce an heir, raise him to be equally ruthless, and continue the Iron Claw legacy of strength. He achieved all of it, and he was miserable. Not that he recognized it at the time. Misery requires the ability to imagine something different, and Silas had carefully eliminated imagination from his life the same way he eliminated every other unnecessary emotion. He woke, he ruled, he made decisions that kept the empire stable and his enemies dead. It was efficient, immaculate. Me. Then a 4-year-old boy stopped before a crying baby and asked for help instead of choosing a queen, and everything Silas built so carefully began to crack. "Papa, are you listening?" Mason's voice breaks through his thoughts. "I asked if we could test the ramp outside. The marble in the east corridor would be perfect for." "No ramps in the corridors." Silas shifts Madison to his other arm so he can meet Mason's eyes. "The servants are already complaining about the blocks in the breakfast room. If you start leaving experiments in high-traffic areas, Thomasine will stage a coup." Mason giggles at the image. "She wouldn't really stage a coup. She threatened to 3 times last week." Valeria has finished collecting the blocks and is now attempting to restore order to the bookshelf. Once for the chemistry experiment that stained the carpet, once for teaching Madison to climb the shelves, and once for reprogramming the kitchen timers to chime every 7 minutes for data collection purposes. That was important research. Mason protests, but he's grinning, completely unrepentant. He leans against Silas's side with the casual affection of a child who has never been taught that the king is untouchable. "Can we go to the gardens after your meetings?" Madison wants to see if the ice on the pond is thick enough to. "Madison is too," Silas interrupts. "She doesn't want to see if ice is thick enough for anything. You want to test ice thickness, and you're using your sister as justification." Mason's grin widens. "Is it working?" Despite himself, Silas feels his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile. He's not sure he remembers how to smile properly, but something close. "We'll see. If your mathematics tutor reports that you actually focused during this afternoon's lesson." "Deal." Mason scrambles off the window seat, already planning his ice experiments out loud, and runs to grab his slate and chalk from the desk in the corner. Valeria has stopped pretending to organize books and is watching Silas with an expression he can't quite read. Madison has fallen asleep against his chest, her small body finally still, her breathing deep and even. Porridge is definitely soaking into his formal tunic. His morning council is starting in 20 minutes and he should leave, should maintain the schedule that keeps his life organized and predictable. He doesn't move. "You're good with them," Valeria says quietly. "Better than you think you are." "I'm adequate." The deflection is automatic, a defense mechanism that doesn't work as well as it used to. "You're more than adequate." She crosses the room and sits on the window seat beside him, close enough that he can smell the lavender soap she prefers, the one he keeps having Thomasine order without explaining why. 2 years ago, you could barely look at Mason without remembering every way you thought you'd failed him. Now you're scheduling your entire day around his experiments and Madison's nap time. That's not. He stops because it is. Somewhere between the solstice ball and now, his carefully controlled life rearranged itself around porridge-covered mornings and bedtime stories and the sound of children laughing in corridors that used to echo with nothing but duty. Valeria's hand finds his free one, the one not supporting Madison's sleeping weight, and her fingers tangle with his in a gesture that's become familiar over months of slow, careful trust building. "The council is still unhappy," she says, and he hears the worry beneath the words. "Ryan is still making trouble. Half the noble houses think you've gone soft. Let them think it." He looks down at Madison's sleeping face, peaceful and safe, then over at Mason scribbling calculations with single-minded focus. "I spent 30 years being hard. It didn't make me a better king. It just made me alone. And now he's sitting in a disaster of a room with a 2-year-old drooling on his formal tunic, and a 6-year-old plotting ice experiments, and a woman who was supposed to be a temporary obligation but has somehow become the center of gravity his entire life orbits around. Now he's late for council meetings and doesn't care. Now he knows what all those poets were talking about when they wrote about wolves finding their mates, about the way everything clicks into place when you finally stop fighting what the goddess has been trying to tell you all along. "Now I understand why Mason stopped walking that night," Silas says quietly. "Why he chose you over every noble bloodline in the Empire." Valeria's breath catches. "Silas." He smelled something real. He finally turns to look at her fully, letting her see past the ice for once, letting her see the truth he's been avoiding for 2 years, because admitting it means accepting that the ruthless Alpha King might actually be capable of something other than calculated decisions. Something worth protecting. Something I spent 3 decades telling myself didn't exist. Her eyes are bright with unshed tears. What are you saying? What is he saying? That he's in love with her. That's too simple, too insufficient for what's actually happened. That the wrong choice was the only right choice. That's closer, but still doesn't capture it. That his life was full of achievements and devoid of warmth until a freezing woman and a crying baby cracked open something he thought had died years ago. I'm saying, he begins, and has to stop because Madison is stirring, making small grumpy sounds against his chest. He adjusts his hold on her, and when he looks back at Valeria, the words come easier than they should. I'm saying that I want to make this official. Not just the guardian claim. Not just protection. He pauses, making sure she understands. I want you as my Luna. Both children officially adopted as my heirs. A real family, not just a political arrangement to appease the council. Valeria's hand tightens on his. The council will lose their minds. The council has been losing their minds for 2 years. They'll adjust. He shifts Madison carefully, then reaches up with his free hand to brush a stray curl from Valeria's face. The gesture is tender in a way that would have been impossible before, when every touch was calculated for political advantage. Or they'll resign, and I'll find new advisors who understand that a king's strength isn't measured by how alone he can stand. You're sure? Her voice is barely a whisper. Really sure. 'Cause once you do this, there's no going back. I'm always going to be the disgraced Omega who. You are the woman who saved my son's soul by accepting his help. Silas interrupts, his voice firm with the kind of certainty he usually reserves for military campaigns. You're the woman who taught him that strength includes kindness. You're the woman who somehow convinced a ruthless Alpha King that maybe perfection isn't about eliminating every weakness. Maybe it's about being strong enough to protect what matters. A tear finally escapes down her cheek. That's the longest speech I've ever heard you give about feelings. Don't get used to it. But there's warmth in his voice now, the kind that only emerges when they're alone. Well, alone except for 2 children, one sleeping and one scribbling mathematics with manic focus. Do you accept? Yes. She says it without hesitation, and Silas feels something in his chest that might be his heart remembering how to beat properly. Yes, I accept. Mason looks up from his calculations, his silver eyes wide. Does this mean Mama Val is really going to be our mama forever? And Madison is really my sister? Like officially? Officially, Silas confirms. Mason's whoop of joy is loud enough to wake Madison, who blinks sleepy brown eyes and immediately demands to know why everyone is crying. Valeria laughs and cries at the same time, pulling both children into a hug that somehow includes Silas too, all 4 of them tangled together on the window seat in a portrait that would scandalize the entire empire if they could see it. The ruthless Alpha King, reduced to being part of a group hug. His formal tunic covered in porridge. His carefully scheduled morning completely derailed. His immaculate reputation replaced with something far more valuable. A family that chose him not because of his crown but despite it. Later, when he finally makes it to the council meeting 2 hours late, he'll have to face questions about his priorities and his judgment and whether sentiment has made him weak. And he'll tell them the truth, that a king who cannot protect a freezing pup is no king at all, and that the wrong choice was the only one fated to save him from a life devoid of warmth. But for now, in this moment, the palace is no longer sterile. It's alive with laughter and chaos and love, and Silas has finally learned that some cracks in your armor aren't weaknesses to be repaired. They're openings that let the light in. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?